The Children of Orion, Part 1, Discovery. The silence of deep space had always been Commander James Chen's companion. For 15 years he'd patrolled the outer rim of human territory, where the darkness between stars stretched for light years, and the only sounds were the gentle hum of ship engines and the occasional crackle of distant radiation. But tonight, that silence was broken. "Commander, we're picking up something unusual," Lieutenant Sarah Morrison called from the communications station, her brow furrowed as she adjusted her headset. "It's faint, intermittent, but it's definitely artificial." Chen straightened in his captain's chair aboard the TSS Vigilance, a medium-class patrol cruiser that had seen better days, but still had teeth when needed. "What kind of signal?" "That's the strange part, sir. It's not a standard distress beacon. It's more like a pulse, rhythmic, almost like—" She paused, her fingers dancing across her console. "Sir, I think it's a heartbeat monitor. Human standard." The bridge fell silent. They were 3 weeks beyond the nearest human colony, deep in unclaimed space that bordered the territory of the Kavresh Collective, a loose alliance of merchant species known more for their business acumen than their morality. "How many signals?" Chen asked, already rising from his chair. "Multiple, sir. At least 20, maybe more. They're clustered together, coming from coordinates that showed nothing. Empty space according to our charts." Chen's jaw tightened. Empty space didn't broadcast human biosigns. All hands to alert status. Helm, set course for those coordinates. Stealth protocols. I want us invisible. The Vigilance turned gracefully through the void, its hull dampeners engaging to mask their thermal signature. As they drew closer over the next 6 hours, the sensors began picking up more than just biosigns. There was a structure out here, something large and deliberately hidden. "Cloaking field detected," announced Ensign Park from Tactical, military grade. "Whatever's out there, someone doesn't want it found." "Can we penetrate it? With our sensors?" "Partially. But sir, you need to see this." The main view screen flickered to life, showing a ghostly outline rendered from pieced-together sensor echoes. It was massive, a research station easily the size of a small city, hanging in the void like a steel spider. Its architecture was unmistakably Kavresh, all sharp angles and efficient brutalism, but the power readings were off the charts for a civilian facility. "Those biosigns?" Chen asked quietly. Morrison's voice was tight. "Coming from the lower levels, sir. Concentrated in what looks like detention blocks." The word hung in the air like poison. Chen had served in the border wars, had seen things that still haunted his sleep. But this was something else entirely. Human biosigns in an illegal research station in unclaimed space could only mean one thing. "Get me a secure channel to command," he ordered. "Encrypt everything. Then prepare a reconnaissance team. We're going in." 4 hours later, Chen floated in the void between his ship and the station, his powered armor's thrusters making minute adjustments to keep him on course. Behind him, 5 of his best personnel followed in tight formation: Morrison, Park, and 3 Marines led by Sergeant Rodriguez. "Remember," Chen's voice crackled through their helmet comms, "we're ghosts. We observe, we record, we leave. If there are human captives in there, we need evidence before we can act." They reached the station's maintenance hull, and Park went to work with a molecular cutter, carving a silent entrance through the outer plating. Inside, emergency lighting cast everything in a sickly amber glow. The corridors were empty, automated systems humming with eerie normalcy. Chen's tactical display showed the biosigns 3 levels below. They moved quickly, using service shafts and maintenance tunnels, avoiding the main corridors where their thermal signatures might trigger alarms. The deeper they went, the colder it got, both literally and metaphorically. Then they heard it, a sound that made Chen's blood freeze. Crying. A child crying in the darkness. Rodriguez's hand went to his weapon, but Chen raised a fist. "Hold position." They were at a junction, and around the corner voices echoed. Not human. The chittering, clicking language of the Kavresh, underlaid with the mechanical translation common to galactic standard. The new batch adapting well to the neural interface trials? Adequately. The younger specimens show greater plasticity as predicted, though the failure rate remains problematic. Acceptable losses. The data is invaluable. The buyers will pay premium prices for this research. Chen's vision went red, but his training held. Morrison was recording everything, her camera capturing both audio and the thermal signatures of the speakers. They waited until the voices faded, then moved forward. The detention wing was worse than Chen's darkest imaginings. Behind reinforced transparent steel, in cells barely large enough to lie down in, were children. Human children. They ranged from perhaps 5 years old to early teens, all wearing thin medical gowns, all bearing the marks of invasive procedures, ports in their temples, injection sites along their arms, monitoring devices embedded in their skin. Some slept fitfully, others stared at nothing with empty eyes. One little girl clutched a makeshift doll fashioned from torn fabric, rocking slowly back and forth. "Mother of God," Morrison whispered. Chen's hand trembled as he raised his wrist-mounted scanner, documenting everything: the cell configurations, the medical equipment, the waste disposal systems that spoke of long-term captivity, and the children, 23 in total, their faces gaunt and pale from lack of sunlight. A door hissed open at the far end of the corridor. "Move!" Chen hissed, and his team dissolved into the shadows as a figure entered. It was Kavresh, insectoid with multiple limbs and compound eyes that glittered in the low light. But it wore a white lab coat, and it carried a data pad that marked it as medical staff. The creature moved from cell to cell, checking readings with the casual indifference of someone examining lab equipment. When it reached the cell with the young girl, it tapped the transparasteel, making her flinch. Subject 17 still showing resistance to the conditioning, it muttered into a recording device. "Recommend increased sedation protocols." Chen's finger moved toward his weapon, but a hand grabbed his wrist. Rodriguez, shaking his head fractionally. "Not yet. Not until they had everything." The scientist moved on, and after an eternity, left through another door. Chen's team regrouped, Morrison still recording. Park's face a mask of barely controlled rage. "Sir," Rodriguez whispered, "we can't leave them here." "We won't," Chen promised, his voice hard as steel. "But we do this smart. We need to find the main control center, get the full scope of this operation. How many more facilities like this exist? Who's buying this research? We burn them all down, Sergeant. Not just this one station." They moved deeper into the facility, following the data conduits to what had to be the central hub. Along the way, they passed labs filled with equipment Chen recognized from xenobiology research. Neural scanners, genetic sequencers, consciousness mapping arrays. All of it top of the line, all of it hideously expensive. The control center was protected by a biometric lock, but Park had brought toys for just such an occasion. While he worked, Chen accessed a public terminal in an adjacent room, pulling up shipping manifests and research logs. What he found made his stomach turn. The children had been taken over a span of 2 years, snatched from the edges of human space, colony ships that went silent, settlements that reported unexplained disappearances, even a few kidnappings from stations where security was lax. The Kavresh Corporation behind this, Telkesh Biosynthetics, had been careful, never taking enough from one place to trigger a major investigation. But the research logs were even worse. Neural mapping for organic computer interfaces, pain response studies for developing enhanced interrogation techniques, genetic manipulation trials. The children weren't just prisoners. They were being dissected piece by piece, their suffering quantified and sold to the highest bidder. "I'm in," Park announced, and the control center door slid open. Inside was a treasure trove of evidence. Chen downloaded everything: client lists, financial records, communication logs with buyers across a dozen species. Some of the names made him go cold. Legitimate governments, major corporations, even a few that operated in human space under false credentials. "Commander," Morrison said urgently, "motion sensors just went active. We've been detected." Alarms began to wail throughout the station. Red emergency lighting flooded the corridors. "Change of plans," Chen barked. "Rodriguez, take your team to the detention wing. Prep those children for emergency evacuation. Morrison, Park, you're with me. We're going to make sure no one stops us." They split up, Chen's group racing toward the main power junction while Rodriguez's Marines headed for the prisoners. Chen's mind was already 3 steps ahead. They'd blow the cloak generators, broadcast an emergency signal that would bring every human ship within a week's jump running, and hold this station until reinforcements arrived. The power junction was guarded, but the Kavresh security personnel weren't expecting armored humans with military-grade weapons and absolutely no mercy. The firefight was brief and brutal. Chen took a plasma burn to his shoulder but barely felt it as he placed the charges. All teams, this is Chen. 30 seconds to detonation. Get those kids to the emergency airlocks now. Rodriguez's voice came back tight with stress. Sir, we've got them, but some can't walk. The neural ports, they're suffering from sensory overload. Carry them. We're not leaving anyone! The charges detonated with a thunderous roar that shook the entire station. The cloaking field collapsed like a soap bubble, and suddenly the facility was visible to every sensor in a dozen light years. Chen and his team ran for the airlocks where the vigilance waited, having maneuvered closer during the chaos. Behind them, Kavresh security forces were mobilizing, but they were too slow, too unprepared for humans who had just discovered something that turned their protective instincts into barely controlled rage. At the airlock, Rodriguez and his Marines were loading the children into emergency transport pods. Some were crying, some were silent, all were terrified. The little girl with the makeshift doll looked up at Chen with eyes that had seen too much. "Are you real?" she whispered. "Or another test?" Chen knelt down, his armored gauntlet gently touching her shoulder. "We're real, sweetheart, and we're taking you home." The last child was loaded as plasma fire began scoring the walls around them. Chen's team returned fire, covering the retreat as the transport pods launched toward the vigilance. "Commander," Morrison shouted. "Multiple ships decloaking. Kavresh military frigate inbound. Then we'd better move fast. All personnel evacuate now." They tumbled through the airlock as it sealed behind them, the Vigilance's engines already burning hot for an escape trajectory. On the bridge, Chen barely had time to strap in before the helmsman threw them into emergency thrust. "They're pursuing, sir," Park reported. "Let them," Chen said grimly, pulling up the communication array. "I want a broadcast on every frequency, civilian, military, commercial, everything. Maximum power, and patch in every piece of evidence we just gathered. Sir, the galaxy is going to see what happened here. And then," Chen's voice dropped to something cold and terrible, "then humanity is going to have a conversation about consequences." The broadcast went out as they jumped to faster than light speed, the Kavresh frigate falling behind. Behind them, the research station hung in space, its secrets exposed, its crimes laid bare. Across human space, the message was received. Military commands, civilian governments, private citizens. Millions of humans watched the footage, saw the children, read the research logs, and humanity began to awaken. Not with panic. Not with fear, with fury. The Children of Orion. Part 2, Reckoning. The footage hit Earth's networks at 0400 GMT during the dead hours when most of the planet slept. By 0600, over 2 billion people had seen it. By noon, that number had quadrupled. Governments tried to control the narrative, to manage the response, to calm the rising tide. They failed utterly. Admiral Victoria Okonkwo stood in the crisis center beneath Geneva, watching the holographic displays light up with troop movements, fleet mobilizations, and diplomatic channels burning white-hot with traffic. She'd served 40 years in the Terran Defense Forces, had commanded fleets in 3 separate conflicts, and had never seen humanity move with such singular, terrifying purpose. "Status report," she commanded, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos. "All battle groups are responding to general mobilization orders," her chief of staff reported crisply. "The 3rd, 7th, and 9th fleets are already underway. Colonial militias are activating across 200 systems. We're also receiving unconventional support." "Unconventional?" "Private military corporations are offering their services free of charge. Merchant marine captains are volunteering their ships. We've even got reports of civilian vessels arming themselves. Admiral, the comptroller estimates we'll have over 3,000 combat-capable ships operational within 72 hours. Okonkwo's jaw tightened. 3,000 ships. Humanity had never assembled such a force, not even during the border wars when their very survival had hung in the balance. But those wars had been about territory, about resources. This was different. This was personal. "And the Galactic Council?" she asked. "Emergency session convened in 6 hours. Every major species will be represented. They're concerned." "Concerned," Okonkwo repeated flatly. 23 human children were tortured for profit, and they're concerned. How diplomatic. Her aide shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, there are indications that other species may have been involved in similar operations. This might be larger than—" "I don't care if it's the entire galaxy," Okonkwo interrupted, her voice cold enough to freeze hydrogen. Those children were ours, and everyone who touched them, everyone who profited from them, everyone who knew and did nothing, they're going to learn a very simple lesson about humanity. What lesson is that, Admiral? You can steal our ships, take our worlds, even kill our soldiers. We'll negotiate. We'll compromise. We'll find middle ground. She turned to face the command center where hundreds of officers worked with grim determination. But harm our children? There is no middle ground. There is no negotiation. There is only consequences. The Galactic Council convened aboard the neutral station Concordia, a massive diplomatic platform that orbited no world and belonged to no species. It had been designed as a place where differences could be resolved peacefully, where wars could be prevented through dialogue. Today, it felt more like a trial. Ambassador Marcus Wright strode into the Grand Chamber with 36 human delegates behind him. Normally, humanity occupied a modest position in the chamber's tiered seating, respected but not dominant, one voice among hundreds. Today, the other species parted before them like water before a warship's prow. Wright was a career diplomat, a man who had spent 30 years building bridges between humanity and the wider galaxy. He'd negotiated trade agreements, resolved border disputes, and fostered understanding between vastly different cultures. He was known for his patience, his measured words, his ability to find compromise. That man died the moment he'd seen the footage from the Telkesh station, the Council Prime, a floating crystalline entity named Shaltor who spoke for the Assembly, pulsed with carefully neutral colors. Ambassador Wright, this council recognizes the gravity of recent events. However, we must urge restraint. The laws governing laws, Wright interrupted, his voice echoing through the chamber's acoustics. You want to discuss laws, Prime? Then let's start with the Sapient Rights Convention's Article 4. No sentient being shall be subjected to torture or involuntary experimentation. Article 7. The trafficking of sentient beings for any purpose constitutes a crime against civilization itself. He activated his holographic display, and the chamber filled with images from Chen's recording. Children in cages, medical equipment covered in blood, research logs documenting pain thresholds and psychological breaking points. These are human children, Wright continued, his voice rising, aged 5 to 14 years, kidnapped from our space over a 2-year period, subjected to neural dissection, genetic manipulation, and systematic torture, all for profit. And where was this council? Where were the laws then? Silence. Across the chamber, delegates from 24 species refused to meet his gaze. We have identified the perpetrators, Wright said, his tone dropping to something deadly quiet. Telkesh Biosynthetics, a Kavresh corporation, but they didn't operate in a vacuum. We've traced their financial records, their client lists, their supply chains. Another holographic display activated, this one showing a web of connections spanning the galaxy. Corporate entities, government agencies, criminal syndicates, over 40 different organizations across 15 species. Some of you, Wright said, letting his gaze sweep the chamber, bought this research. Some of you provided the equipment. Some of you simply looked the other way because it was profitable to do so. The Kavresh delegate, a high-ranking noble named Vexur, activated his speaking platform. Ambassador, while this incident is regrettable, Telkesh Biosynthetics operated as a rogue entity. The Kavresh Collective had no official knowledge. Don't, Wright cut him off. Don't insult us with lies. We have communications between Telkesh executives and your government's Biotechnology Oversight Committee. We have financial transfers from collective treasury accounts. You knew, you approved, you profited. Vexur's mandibles clicked with agitation. You overstep, human. This council will not tolerate. This council, Wright said, his voice like steel, will listen. Because humanity is done asking for permission. He touched his communication implant, and on cue, every holographic display in the chamber shifted to show the same image. The assembled human fleet, 3,000 strong, hanging in space like a promise of violence. This council, Wright said, his voice like steel, will listen. Because humanity is done asking for permission. He touched his communication implant, and on cue, every holographic display in the chamber shifted to show the same image. The assembled human fleet, 3,000 strong, hanging in space like a promise of violence. We present this council with a simple demand, Wright continued. Every entity involved in the Telkesh operation, corporate, governmental, or private, will be identified and surrendered to human jurisdiction within 48 hours. Every facility operating similar programs will be shut down immediately and opened to inspection. And every species represented here will submit to transparency protocols regarding biological research programs. Impossible! The Telkan representative rose, his vocal sac inflating with indignation. You cannot dictate terms to the entire galaxy. Watch us, Wright replied coldly. 48 hours. After that, we will come for them ourselves. And we will not ask permission. We will not file diplomatic protests. We will not respect borders or sovereignty or any of the comfortable lies we tell ourselves about civilized behavior. Shaltor pulsed urgent orange. Ambassador, you are threatening war with potentially dozens of species simultaneously. Such an action would be justified, Wright finished. You see, Prime, there's something you need to understand about humanity. We are adaptable. We are patient. We can be reasoned with, compromised with, even defeated in conventional ways. But we are also a species that evolved protecting our young above all else. It's coded into our DNA, burned into our psyche. You can threaten us and we'll negotiate. You can attack us and we'll defend ourselves proportionally. He leaned forward, his eyes hard as diamond. But harm our children and we will burn your world to ash and salt the ruins. Not out of strategy, not for tactical advantage, but because every human, from the poorest colonist to the highest admiral, will demand it. Because we cannot sleep knowing you're still out there. Because we are, at our core, a species that protects its young at any cost. The chamber erupted in overlapping protests and demands for order. Wright stood silent, unmoved, as the galaxy's representatives raged and pleaded and threatened. Finally, Shaltor managed to restore order. The council will deliberate, the Prime said carefully. This session is adjourned for 6 hours. We strongly suggest all parties use this time to pursue diplomatic solutions. Wright gathered his delegation and left without another word. Behind him, the council dissolved into frantic sidebar conversations and emergency communications with home governments. The message was spreading. Humanity wasn't bluffing. This wasn't negotiation. This was an ultimatum. 47 hours and 32 minutes after Wright's address, Admiral Okonkwo received the first response. The Telkan Confederacy had arrested 17 officials and frozen the assets of 3 corporations involved in purchasing Telkesh's research. Within the hour, similar reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The Hivanti surrendered an entire research division. The Prethoric Order excommunicated a high priest who had funded neural mapping studies. Even minor species who had barely been aware of the operation began voluntary audits, desperate to avoid being associated with it, but not the Kavresh Collective. Vexur's official response was defiant. The collective does not bow to threats from upstart species. Telkesh Biosynthetics operated within Kavresh sovereign space under Kavresh law. We will conduct our own investigation and render justice according to our own standards. Any human military action within collective space will be considered an act of war. Okonkwo read the message twice, then looked up at her command staff. Thoughts? Captain Diana Reeves, her tactical officer, didn't hesitate. They're gambling that we won't risk a full-scale war over this. That eventually cooler heads will prevail and we'll accept some kind of compromise. And will we? Okonkwo asked quietly. The silence that followed was answer enough. Every officer in the room had seen the footage. Many had children of their own. The thought of backing down now, of letting the perpetrators hide behind sovereignty and legal technicalities was simply impossible. No, ma'am, Reeves said finally. We won't. Okonkwo nodded slowly. Then we proceed. Commander Reeves, activate Operation Righteous Fury. All fleets are weapons free. Yes, Admiral. Reeves hesitated. Ma'am, for the record. Thank you. For what, Commander? For not trying to talk us out of it? For understanding that some things matter more than politics? Okonkwo smiled grimly. Commander, I have 6 grandchildren. If anyone had done to them what was done to those kids... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The human fleet arrived in Kavresh space 48 hours after the deadline, emerging from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation across 36 systems simultaneously. They didn't attack civilian targets or civilian ships. They didn't need to. Every Telkesh facility, research stations, corporate headquarters, manufacturing plants was located with ruthless precision and systematically destroyed. Kavresh military vessels that tried to intervene found themselves outmatched and outgunned by humans who fought with the desperate intensity of parents protecting their young. Within 72 hours, Telkesh Biosynthetics ceased to exist. Its executives were captured, its assets seized, its research destroyed. The few who tried to flee found that humanity had extended its reach across the galaxy. Bounties posted, intelligence networks activated, every human in occupied space becoming a potential hunter. The Kavresh Collective sued for peace after losing a quarter of their military fleet in a single engagement at the Kelthus Nebula. The battle wasn't even close. Human commanders, many of whom had families waiting back home, fought with a cold precision that terrified their opponents. They didn't rage or rant. They simply executed their mission with the mechanical efficiency of people who had already decided that mercy was no longer an option. Vexur himself was discovered trying to flee to neutral space. His ship was intercepted by a human corvette commanded by a lieutenant, whose daughter was the same age as some of the rescued children. The lieutenant's report was brief. Target secured. Requesting prisoner transfer. When asked why he hadn't simply destroyed Vexur's ship, the lieutenant's response became famous. Because death would be too quick. He gets to face justice, human justice. 3 months later, Commander James Chen stood in a hospital ward on Earth, watching physical therapists work with the children his team had rescued. Most were recovering both physically and mentally. The neural ports had been carefully removed. The psychological trauma would take longer, but Earth's best specialists were working around the clock. The little girl with the makeshift doll, her name was Emma, he'd learned, saw him and smiled. It was the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, and it nearly broke him. "Commander Chen," a voice said behind him. He turned to find Admiral Okonkwo approaching, her uniform bearing new decorations from the campaign. "Admiral," he acknowledged. "Walk with me." They strolled through the hospital gardens, where several of the children played under watchful supervision. In the distance, Earth's blue sky stretched endlessly, something these kids hadn't seen in years. "The Galactic Council has ratified new protocols," Okonkwo said. "Universal prohibition on involuntary biological research. Mandatory reporting requirements. Independent inspections. Everything we demanded and more." "Good," Chen said simply. "The Kavresh Collective has been sanctioned. Vexur and his co-conspirators face trial at The Hague next month. We've also identified 17 other operations across the galaxy, none involving human subjects but similar in nature. They're being shut down as we speak." "Also good." Okonkwo stopped studying him. "You know what we did changed everything, right? The balance of power, our reputation in the galaxy. Some species fear us now. Some hate us. They're calling us the berserker species on some worlds." Chen watched Emma chase a butterfly, her laughter carrying on the wind. "Let them call us whatever they want, Admiral, as long as they remember the lesson, which is
that humanity will tolerate almost anything.
We'll negotiate, compromise, even forgive. But our children?" He turned to face Okonkwo, his expression hard. "Our children are the line no one crosses. Ever. And anyone who forgets that will face extinction. Not because we're cruel, but because we cannot, will not, allow anything else." Okonkwo nodded slowly. "Some of the council members are asking when we'll stand down, when things will return to normal. What did you tell them?" "That we already have stood down. This is us showing restraint. This is us being merciful." She smiled coldly. "They should have seen us before we found those kids. After that, well, everything that happened was humanity on our best behavior.